All right, I'm recording now. Dr. Lamosa, you're on mute.
No, I wasn't. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being with us today. My name is Dr. Priscilla Lamosa. I'm an assistant professor at the College of Social Work. And before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping items. Please make sure that your microphone is muted all through the presentation to avoid background noise and echoing noises while Jessie is presenting her capstone. If you have not already done so, please make sure that you are ready to be engaged. This is going to be a very engaging presentation. For those of you who would like to receive CE credits for this presentation, you must have registered via the Training Institute. And if you did so, you will receive a follow-up email after the session that gives you directions on how to retrieve your CEs. This presentation will last approximately 60 minutes, and we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So throughout the presentation, if you have questions that pop into your mind, feel free to put them in the chat, and then we will address them at the end of the presentation. Now I'd like to take a moment to introduce our doctoral candidate today. Jessie Pablo is a doctoral candidate here at the University of Kentucky College of Social Work. She received her Bachelor's of Social Work in 2010 and her Master's of Social Work in 2011. She has 10 years of experience teaching higher education. Jessie is an assistant professor and field director for the online DSW program at Indiana Wesleyan University. Her research interests focus on cultural responsiveness in social work education, immigrant population engagement and integration, online social work education pedagogy, experiential and transformational learning, and relational cultural theory in supervision. Jessie's capstone research focuses on promoting culturally responsive education by equipping social work students for practice with immigrant populations. The Capstone project provides a framework for curriculum development and professional training to advance culturally responsive practitioners who are competent to engage with immigrant populations. Jessie served in leadership for the DSW student community and was on the DSW Advisory Council. During her DSW studies, Jessie received 2 scholarships from the Southeastern Brain Tumor Foundation and an award from Phi Alpha Honor Society. She co-published Meta-Synthesis of OER Transition in Online Higher Education in the International Journal of Open Educational Resources in 2020. She has presented 8 times at national conferences, including at the Social Work Distance Education Conference and the North American Association of Christians in Social Work Convention. It is my absolute pleasure and with great excitement that I turn it over to Ms. Pablo.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming to my presentation on culturally responsive education, equipping social work students for practice with immigrant populations. For those who don't know me, I am Jessie Pablo, and I am so excited to be presenting my capstone after 3 years in the DSW program here at the University of Kentucky. This workshop will present a conceptual framework for working with immigrant populations, and we will talk about evidence-based strategies for culturally responsive practice. Drawing from a systematic literature research, we will explore a culturally responsive multi-theoretical framework, and I will present a model to reorient curriculum development. Finally, I will share implications for both practice and education. While I'm presenting, I will not be monitoring the Zoom chat, but I encourage you to put questions in there as I will plan to have time to address those at the end. First, I want to run over our learning objectives. At the end of today's presentation, you should be able to differentiate between traditional cultural competence models and cultural responsiveness frameworks when preparing social work students for practice with immigrant populations. We will analyze the four components of the multi-theoretical framework, which include ecological systems theory, relational cultural theory, intersectionality framework, and transformational learning theory, and how they collectively support culturally responsive practice with immigrants. You should be able to evaluate how specific curriculum components, such as assignments, activities, and experiential learning, can be integrated across the social work curriculum to develop cultural responsiveness. Understand how to design learning activities that foster self-awareness of positionality and power dynamics in cross-cultural social work practice, and identify evidence-based pedagogical strategies that center immigrant voice. Oh, let me move my Zoom and promote critical self-reflection among social work students. So to have an accurate understanding of what I'm going to be talking about, I want to operationalize some key words. First, while it is very important to understand the uniqueness and complexities of categories of immigration, during this presentation, I will use just the term immigrant, and it will be inclusive of all categories. So that could cover refugees, asylum seekers, legal permanent residents, different kinds of documentation status, immigrants who have now obtained citizenship, temporary immigrants, or non-immigrants, which could be temporary workers or student visas. So I'm operationalizing immigrants as any individual who is a foreign-born non-citizen and immigrates to the United States. I also want to take this moment just to note that the appropriate term is an undocumented immigrant, not an illegal immigrant. Cultural competence is understood as the behaviors, attitudes, and policies that enable effective practice in cross-cultural situations. And cultural responsiveness goes a step beyond cultural competence and is understood as the recursive, dynamic process that emphasizes ongoing reflective processing and includes inclusive relationships, cultural respect, and cultural sensitivity. I want to share a little bit about my positionality as it provides the lens through which I approach this research and also highlights the significance of this research to me personally. I am coming to this from a social constructivistic perspective, which means that I believe that knowledge about cultural competency is not fixed or universal. It is socially constructed through our interactions as educators, as students, as institutions, and just as people in general. As culture itself is continually evolving, so focusing on cultural competency cannot be an endpoint because culture continues to evolve, so we cannot stop there. So my research emphasizes cultural responsiveness as an ongoing adaptive process. This perspective also recognizes there are multiple truths and realities that are shaped by our different experiences and positions in society. So this research prioritizes relationships and centering marginalized voices. I also bring a personal experience to this. On a personal level, I am a Caucasian woman in an interracial marriage with my husband, who is a first-generation Filipino immigrant. We are raising our three biracial immigrant-influenced children, and the term immigrant influence refers to U.S.-born spouses and children of immigrants, so I'm immigrant-influenced as well. Over the past decade, I have seen how my husband's immigration experiences have impacted him differently than others, with some people experiencing more or less marginalization or oppression based upon their positionality. So these experiences have deeply shaped how I understand culture, identity, and belonging. I also recognize the power and privilege I hold because of my positionality. I'm also an educator, and when I reflect upon my own social work experience, I recognize a huge gap in preparation to work with immigrant populations, thus guiding my research question, which was, how do social work programs prepare students for competent practice with immigrant populations? To address potential bias from my perspective, I've been very intentional about using systematic methods throughout my research, including transparency in my search process, standardized quality assessment tools, peer consultation through conversation circles and with faculty, and incorporating diverse theoretical perspectives in my understanding of cultural responsiveness. I share all of this because I believe that our positionality shapes what we see, what questions we ask, and how we interpret within those findings. Within this context, I want to turn it to the presentation itself by taking a moment to ask you guys to interact and let me know what is your connection to immigrant populations. So you can just use the Zoom reactions that are available, and I ask you to do this with whatever level you are comfortable with self-disclosure. So at the bottom of your Zoom screen, if you're able, if you want to give a thumbs up for I have provided services to an immigrant or I haven't engaged with an immigrant in a professional setting. If you want to do a heart reaction for I am personally connected to someone who is an immigrant, or the celebration reaction if you are immigrant influenced or an immigrant yourself. All right, thank you all. I saw a variety of responses. Okay, so I want to provide some rationale for my research to understand why this is significant enough that I've dedicated 3 years and potential for trajectory of my career to this. So globally, there are 258 million people around the world who live in the country where they are not born. So that's not the United States, but that is 258 million people who have immigrated away from their home country. In the United States, as of January 2025, there are 53.3 million immigrants living in the United States, which composes about 15.4% of our population. Now, that's already an outdated statistic, but we can see that that is a pretty significant number. And of the population in the United States, about 28% of the population is immigrant influenced, so even significantly more. Immigrant influenced individuals, again, are the US born spouses and children of immigrants. The experience of immigration is a social determinant of health, and when there are obstacles to successful integration, whether they are minor or not, they adversely impact well-being. And as a result, immigrants will interact with helping professionals in a variety of settings. The Grand Challenges of Social Work just started a cross-cutting group this spring that affirms that the integration of immigrants is a critical priority and overlaps with other grand challenges of social work. This initiative's focus on immigration underscores the profession's recognition that current approaches to working with immigrants are insufficient, and we must prioritize research in this area. So the problem of why this has come up is that social workers are on the front lines with immigrants in all kinds of settings, in hospitals, in schools, community health centers, detention centers, law offices, you name it. The critical gap is that many social workers report that they are not competent to work with immigrant populations, and social work education demonstrates insufficient preparation for this essential practice area. So I completed my capstone on this topic, and you can see in this conceptual map chart the different areas where I address this in my products. So in the blue, I started with my systematic literature review, asking the question, how do social work programs prepare students for competent practice with immigrants? And you can see themes and gaps that came up. The immigrant content was optional and isolated. It was not occurring or present in most classes. The themes that came up were experiential learning, immigrant voice integration, and critical self-reflection. So these gaps and themes in the SLR informed my conceptual paper, which is in orange in the middle. This conceptual framework was made up of 4 theories: relational-cultural theory, ecological systems theory, intersectionality framework, and Masrow's transformational learning that formed the tenets of my practice application paper, which is a culturally responsive learning orientation. Now, this practice application paper builds upon the key themes and findings of the systematic literature review and also meets the gaps by integrating the curriculum across the whole program and addresses the need to focus on cultural responsiveness over cultural competence, which I will discuss in more detail soon. So I completed a systematic literature review in alignment with Prisma in August of 2025. The research question was developed with the SPICE framework, and that looks at 5 different components. The setting for my research was social work higher education. The perspective was focused on both social work students and social work educators. The interventions I was looking for was curriculum and educational strategies that were focused on cultural competency. There was no comparison that was taking place, but I limited it only to interventions that were geared towards working with immigrant populations. And the evaluation outcomes I was looking for was cultural competency development working with immigrant populations. So I searched in EBSCOhost and Web of Science. I looked in 8 different databases that were all related to either social work or education. And my inclusion factors were articles must be published in English, published between January 2010 and August 1st of 2025, peer-reviewed journal articles written within the context of social work education, and I captured both BSW and MSW program articles. The focus was on immigrants or immigration and included keywords of cultural competency, cultural responsiveness, or cultural humility. So this is my Prisma flowchart. When I first started, there were 242 articles that were pulled from EBSCOhost and Web of Science. After I removed articles that were duplicated, I reduced it to 101 articles. I then screened by title, removed 59, and removed 9 when I screened by abstracts. And then I was left with 33 articles to review for full text eligibility. 2 of those articles were removed for not discussing cultural competence. 11 were removed for not having an educational intervention, and 11 were removed for not focusing specifically on immigrant populations. So there were 9 articles from that search left. I then did citation chaining and found 15 more articles, which were mostly from the references of those 33 articles that I reviewed for full text. After screening title and abstract, I had 6 articles left from citation chaining, and only 1 of those articles was kept, which left me with 10 total articles. And those 10 articles are the ones that are cited at the bottom of this screen. So there were 3 themes that came up, and there were 4 gaps and limitations, which once I synthesized the key findings from those 10 articles. The first theme was experiential learning, which was discussed in all 10 articles. So some of the activities that they discussed for experiential learning was interviews, guest speakers, service learning, community involvement, and professional partnerships. There were also elements of implicit curriculum in the way that the classroom experience and interaction were designed that created some experiential learning opportunities. The second theme that was integrated was immigrant voice. Students were exposed to immigrant narratives through both guest speakers and interviews with immigrants. And students also interacted with immigrant narratives through readings, journal articles, newspaper articles, and watching documentary films that highlighted human rights and cultural diversity. And these articles highlighted that by integrating immigrant voice and minority voice, curriculum development ensured that the course's implicit and explicit curriculum would reflect multicultural knowledge rather than defaulting to whiteness. The third theme that came up was critical self-reflection to increase self-awareness and an understanding of positionality. And the interventions for this was focused on reflection papers or group discussions to process after either the experiential learning or the immigrant voice integration. Self-reflection was evidence to reveal implicit bias and false assumptions. And then the gaps and limitations. First, it was evident that there was a gap between social work education and practice with immigrant populations. Second, immigrant-related content was inconsistently implemented and limited to only one assignment or course. And in all of those programs, the course was optional. It was not a core course. So not all students who were matriculating through the program would even receive that assignment or participate in that course. Third, the curriculum was very specific and was not always generalizable learning. For example, one of the articles focused on interviewing specifically Thai marriage immigrants in China, and another one, students participated in community service learning by partnering with Spanish major students, and they served breakfast to Mexican day laborers in a construction parking lot. And then finally, the other limitation was that immigrant related content must match the socio-political climate, which means it must constantly be evaluated and updated. So I want to take another moment to ask you to respond in your own professional role. How equipped are you to work with in your own professional role, how equipped are you to work with immigrant populations? And I'm going to launch a Zoom poll, and the answers could either be not equipped, I have received no training and or lack confidence. I am somewhat equipped, I have training, but I recognize significant gaps. I am well equipped. I have received training and or feel generally competent, or very well equipped. I have extensive training and or feel confident. Answers are coming in. Give it another couple seconds. Okay, I'm going to share the numbers that I see in case you cannot see it on your screen, but about 10% of you reported you are not equipped, 70% reported you are somewhat equipped, 17% say well equipped, and 3% or one of you stated very well equipped, that you have extensive training and or feel confident. Oh, sharing results. So you can see that. Thank you all for participating in that. I am excited for those of you who are feeling some confidence. So, in social work, there are professional requirements that if we meet these, we could say that we are prepared to work with immigrant populations. So, there are the NASW ethical mandates and the CSWE, which let me back up. NASW is the National Association of Social Workers, and CSWE is the Council on Social Work Education, which is the accrediting body for social work programs. So they have standards that each focus on practice with at-risk populations and in cross-cultural and diverse settings. So those are on the screen. Standard 1.05 ethical standards require that we demonstrate cultural competence, which looks at, and the way this is defined is understanding, knowledge, awareness, and education is cultural competence. Standard 4.01 states that we must be competent in emerging knowledge that is related to our relevant practice for competency. 4.02 states that we are specifically prohibited from discriminating individuals based upon their immigration status. And standard 6.04, we are expected to actively advocate for equitable access, to expand opportunities for marginalized populations, to promote culturally inclusive practice, and to challenge discrimination. And then, as part of the NASW indicators of cultural competence, it states that we are culturally competent if we have the ability to engage respectively and effectively with individuals from diverse backgrounds in a manner that recognizes, affirms, values, and upholds their dignity. And finally, CSWE accreditation standards for social work curriculum assess competency with immigrants only as it is understood as a dimension of diversity. So if you understand that immigration is a form of diversity, then you are considered competent for ADEI. Um, so what is missing? If we are, as social workers, so if we are upholding those professional expectations, why are we not equipped to work with immigrants? Are we not abiding by those, or are we not doing those enough? I believe that the absence of immigrant-specific competency is conceptually significant because it keeps immigrant-specific practice in the background rather than making it an explicit educational and professional priority. Curriculum and training must include immigrant-specific content to prepare social work students to address the complex needs of immigrant populations. My systematic literature reviewed a gap that immigrant-related content is not consistently integrated across the curriculum, but is rather offered as a single course or an optional assignment. In order to effectively equip practitioners with immigrant populations, we must make a conceptual shift away from cultural competence, which is what these standards promote, and towards cultural responsiveness. And so, to me, this difference between cultural competence and cultural responsiveness is not just a matter of semantics or word choice. I consider cultural responsiveness to be like a dance of diversity. It has action, it has movement, it's working together. Cultural responsiveness is operationalized as an ongoing, nonlinear process through which practitioners are engaging relationally with immigrant populations while maintaining critical awareness of ecological systems that shape experiences. It is grounded in a relational, ecological, and an anti-oppressive approach. It focuses on ongoing interactive processes that concentrates on the ability to engage with immigrants. Engage is really a key word for me with cultural responsiveness. So within this framework of cultural responsiveness, social workers are responsible for self-reflection and challenging systemic barriers. This framework provides a lens to practice that considers all of the moving pieces of an immigrant's experience and essentially is responsive to the needs and strengths of the context in which we are engaging. When we are coming to practice with cultural responsiveness, we are coming ready to learn and grow rather than relying upon the knowledge and skills that we already have. So I created this just for you to see on the right side how cultural responsiveness meets some of the weaknesses or the limitations left by cultural competence. So in order to understand, it is important to understand the traditional competence models to understand the need for a new approach of cultural responsiveness. So, cultural competence is understood as the ability to engage respectively and effectively with individuals from a diverse background that recognizes, affirms, values, and upholds their dignity. Traditional cultural competence models rely on a framework comprised of awareness, knowledge, and skills. And so, in this approach, cultural competence is a teachable skill, it is a definitive element, and it is a fixed competency. As an educator, I can state, yes, my students have cultural competency because they have this skill and they have this knowledge. Cultural competency assumes that when we engage in self-reflection and we address our bias and we learn about a culture, then we are equipped to work with that culture. So cultural competency is static. It assumes that competency is achievable based upon knowledge and skills. Cultural responsiveness is ongoing. It is a contextually grounded process of reflection to cultivate the insight necessary to work across diversity. The core components of cultural responsiveness are relational interaction and an understanding of ecology that challenges a priori knowledge, achievable skills, and power differentials. So it challenges all of that knowledge that we already hold and we come into this situation with by saying that's not enough. There's more to learn and grow. So, cultural responsiveness is more of an individualized approach, and cultural competence is more generalized across diversity groups. So, cultural competence would say, I can work with this individual person, while cultural competence would say, I can work with this group of people. So, this shift from cultural competence to cultural responsiveness frames learning about immigrant populations as a process rather than a competency that we can master. So I'm going to read some statements, and once you have a strong feeling one way or the other about them, I want you to do another one of those Zoom reactions, whether these statements are myths or facts, and they are all the same thing. So if you think all of these reactions are myths, I want you to do the wow Zoom reaction. And if you think these are facts, you can do a Zoom thumbs up. So the first is that learning about someone's culture is enough to effectively work with their culture. Cultural responsiveness is something you achieve once and you maintain. Taking one diversity course is enough preparation to work with immigrant populations. Being from an immigrant family or being immigrant influenced yourself automatically makes you culturally responsive. And social workers are already trained to work with diverse populations, so immigrant specific training is not necessary. Okay. I saw wows. These are, in fact, all myths. So I developed this framework for cultural responsiveness that shows how much more interactive it is in comparison to cultural competence. So the cyclical arrows around the outside show the nature of each of these pieces working together. So these four circles in the middle of cultural responsiveness are the key tenets of each of the theories that builds this framework. So intersectionality framework, it requires ecological thinking, transformational learning, and relationships. And then you can see just visually looking at the framework for cultural competence, this Venn diagram is stagnant. It just has value, skills, and knowledge, which are not a bad thing. It just does not meet the needs that we have. So I'm going to discuss the first two theories of my multi-theoretical framework for cultural responsiveness, which is relational cultural theory and ecological systems theory. So, relational cultural theory moves us to connect and develop growth fostering relationships with immigrants, which will mitigate consequences that they experience from disconnection. And this requires authentic relationships across cross-cultural differences. So, a culturally responsive approach emphasizes that connections with immigrants can enhance their well-being and development, subsequently reducing the impact of isolation. So, an example of this is fostering meaningful relationships that promote welcome and belonging can help eradicate mental health issues experienced as a consequence of disconnection in their new community, such as the lack of social relationships, language isolation, or not being connected to the resources that are needed. And then ecological systems theory, we know as social workers, an ecological lens is necessary because we need a holistic view of the systems at play and how they impact immigrants and how cultural differences play a role. So I'm going to break down what we look at each level. On the micro level, when working with immigrant populations, we look at, just for example, language proficiency and how that influences immigrants' access and opportunities, access to resources like housing, education, and employment. We also consider what are their daily interactions like with their neighbors, their coworkers, and their classmates, and how does that impact them. At the meso level, we look at access to co-ethnic communities, such as for my family, there's a pretty active Filipino American society in our community that holds many events, has lots of parties that my family participates in that helps to maintain cultural ties as well as that experience of welcome and belonging. Do immigrants experience anti-immigrant attitudes in their communities? What immigrant support services are available to them, and what is the community composition like for them to experience belonging or isolation? At the macro level, of course, we look at immigrant policies, but we also look at things like economic opportunities, justice system practices, transportation infrastructure, housing affordability, and what the media narratives are portraying. We also consider how well their national cultural values and ideologies match with the local societal systems. And finally, at the meta level, we look at historical immigration patterns and shifting political climates. We also consider things like generational differences in integration, such as if there are older immigrants who prioritize more cultural preservation, while sometimes younger or second immigrants choose to or do assimilate more quickly. We consider the role of global events like conflict and war. For example, we understand the trauma an immigrant experiences when their home country is at war or experiences a national disaster. And then the last two theories in this multi-theoretical framework are intersectionality framework and Mesereau's transformational learning theory. The intersectionality framework adds an anti-oppressive approach and assures that practitioners are aware of their own positionality and privilege when interacting with immigrants. It emphasizes the overlapping identities and recognizes individual identity. This prevents the categorization of cultural groups and fosters an individualized approach. For example, this looks at how my husband's positionality as a well-educated English-speaking Filipino immigrant is very different, for example, than a Filipino female immigrant who may have a thicker accent and does not have formal professional training or as high of a level of education. Or how different it may be for a male who is immigrating with his family from a culture or a country that does not have what we would consider a positive reputation in the country that they are immigrating to. This shows that we have to be careful at lumping immigrants together, for example, Filipino immigrants or Venezuelan refugees. It also shows how some individuals are more vulnerable and at risk. And so we can consider the experiences of things like class segregation, hate crimes, and power and privilege. Finally, Mesereau's transformational learning theory is foundational for increasing awareness through the emphasis on reflection, questioning assumptions, and perspective transformation. This theory explains that disorienting exposures cause us to grow as we gain a new perspective. Disorienting dilemmas are those that when they occur, they are new, they are uncomfortable, they are uncertain, they're unexpected. We just don't know what is going on. And this could occur when an individual is exposed to multicultural narratives, immigrants, or diverse cultural groups for the first time. With this lens of transformational learning, we seek meaning in these disorienting experiences. As a result, we must engage in intentional, structured self-reflection and analyze what assumptions we recognize that came up in our reactions and what those signal about our beliefs and our values. The outcomes of transformational learning include increased self-awareness through cognitive, emotional, and cultural shifts, as well as the integration of those diverse cultural perspectives that we gained. Through this new perspective, we gain a new worldview that allows us to be better able to engage with diverse cultural groups. So, out of this multi-theoretical framework, in my practice application paper, I developed the culturally responsive learning orientation. And this is designed specifically for curriculum development, but really can be applied to supervision models or professional development. So, this model reorients the learning process to equip culturally responsive practitioners. This is not just a model that's built upon equipping people with skills and knowledge, but more of those tenets that are necessary to engage. So it addresses both implicit and explicit curriculum. It provides a framework for not just what to teach, but how we are to teach it. So the four key components of this learning orientation are based upon the four tenets of that multi-theoretical framework. So first, after I take a drink, first, learning is reoriented away from individual level cultural knowledge and towards understanding instead how multiple environmental contexts shape the immigration experience. With this perspective, issues are viewed as systemic oppression rather than individual pathology. Attention should be given to analyzing how things like policies, societal values, community resources, attitudes towards diversity, and cultural ideologies impact immigrants. Social workers should be competent to support systemic change and advocate for equitability and dignity. Second, curriculum and training must be reoriented with an understanding of the intersectionality of overlapping identities and systems of oppression. We must raise awareness to the dynamics of power and privilege, including the power and privilege that practitioners and citizens hold over clients and immigrants. For example, social workers must be trained to recognize different life experiences between male and female immigrants, those who immigrate as a refugee compared to those who come on a work visa, and how differences in aspects like religion, culture, and language play in marginalization or oppression. An intersectionality orientation equips students to understand the complexities of engaging with immigrants based upon things like race, class, gender, immigration status, and more. Third, practice is reoriented to build upon relationships and foster connection. Curriculum is designed to provide experiential learning wherein students can interact with immigrants or hear immigrant narratives. And this will move from learning about immigrants to engaging with immigrant communities. Human exchange and interaction are part of the implicit curriculum, wherein the tenets necessary to engage effectively with immigrants are taught and caught. For example, the way that we, with our power and privilege and positionality, the way that we speak about immigrants will influence how others value immigrants. Finally, we seek out disorienting dilemmas to grow and to learn. These new and sometimes uncomfortable experiences provide exposure to new perspectives. And this leads to transformational learning when we follow these experiences up with critical self-reflection and self-awareness. So that is the key thing with these disorienting dilemmas. We cannot just stop at the exposure. We have to be strategic about that reflection, because the outcomes of the reflection is what lead to that transformational learning, which include increased self-awareness through critically analyzing our assumptions and allowing for the creation of emotional and cultural shifts. With critical self-reflection, we begin to analyze things like our beliefs, our bias, our values, and our gaps in understanding. As we listen to clients' experiences and consider the systemic barriers impacting them, we often develop greater empathy, cultural humility, and awareness of intersectionality. And over time, this can lead to a shift in worldview, not just gaining a new perspective or knowledge, but transforming how we understand identity, how we understand practice inclusivity, and how we approach our role as social workers with immigrants. So ultimately, the learning becomes transformational when we integrate these new perspectives into our professional identity, demonstrating more culturally responsive and ethically grounded practice. So now I will focus on how we implement the orientation across curriculum development and then consider professional development as well. So first, immigrant-related content should be integrated throughout the whole curriculum. We cannot continue to leave this as an optional add-on. Because immigrants interact with social workers at all levels of practice, from clinical services to policy advocacy, all social workers should receive training in immigrant-focused content, regardless of what is their intended area of specialization. This also requires ongoing professional development. Cultural competence, cultural responsiveness is not considered a task to achieve, but is instead should be considered a reflexive commitment to ongoing learning and development. With this, we must also ensure that educators receive training in cultural responsiveness as well. By fostering disorienting dilemmas, we help to create opportunities to identify bias, analyze assumptions, and acknowledge false narratives. And this will help transform practitioners' worldview and their professional identity. We can accomplish this through experiential learning and immigrant voice integration. By providing this in the curriculum, we ensure that students are prepared to experience these disorienting dilemmas when they are in education rather than when they are in practice. We must adapt tools so that they are culturally responsive. For example, tools that are great, like the genogram and ecomap, are not culturally responsive because they have a Western framework that oversimplifies complex kinship systems, misrepresents collectivistic support structures, and they can impose deficits or privilege the practitioner's meaning over the immigrant meaning. And we should adapt tools by co-constructing meaning. We can modify symbols and categories and make the tools more client-focused and user-friendly, or even just optional to complete. There are great tools out there that we should consider adapting that include genograms, ecomaps, culturograms, migration timelines, and life history grids, but as they currently exist, they are not culturally responsive. Finally, as educators, we have to determine how we are going to be able to assess cultural responsiveness. Since this is not a skill that we can check off, we are going to have to create assessments that evaluate students' growth and cultural responsiveness. So, leaning into my constructivistic framework, I believe that students can be participants in this and invest in self-assessment to evaluate their own growth to determine, are we effectively equipping culturally responsive students and practitioners? So the gears of all of this curriculum orientation and implementation are grounded in the immigrant voice integration, experiential learning, and critical self-reflection. So, social work curriculum is often designed with a Eurocentric lens that lacks immigrant representation and perspective. So, we must integrate immigrant voice through things like case studies, vignettes, guest speakers, and immigrant authored materials, which could be TED Talks, podcasts, and books. We could also invite immigrants to participate in things like course design as teachers, facilitators, or participating and providing trainings. Experiential learning is essential because it builds confidence, it reduces anxiety about engaging with diversity, and helps students apply classroom knowledge to real-world practice with immigrant populations. So by incorporating activities like community partnerships, guest speakers, role plays, service learning, educators are creating opportunities for students to develop empathy, to challenge bias, and to understand ecological systems that are impacting immigrant lives while in the classroom. And this pedagogical approach transforms learning from passive content to active absorption, active relationship building, and preparing students to navigate the complexities of engaging with immigrant communities. And we have to provide and utilize structured opportunities for critical self-reflection to experience transformational learning and growth. So this has to be both systematic and intentional. And this can be through things like reflection papers, critical incident journaling, or discussion groups. If we are cutting it short and not promoting critical self-reflection, then transformational learning is not going to take place. So, when we look at how to integrate immigrant content throughout the curriculum, I've got lots of ideas on the slides that are just bits and pieces from some of the core courses in social work curriculum and what some of those activities could look like. I'm not going to read this slide, but what is necessary is to integrate immigrant-related content across each social work course. This is relevant both to professional development and training as well. And as I mentioned, the new cross-cutting group with the grand challenges focused on immigration, this came up as we recognize that this is cross-sectional. So each specialized content of courses, including trainings, should discuss how the learning outcomes of each course are relevant to engaging with immigrant populations. So when we're assessing policy, we have to understand how do we assess policy from the lens of working with immigrant populations. I do have 3 examples of assignments that I'm going to talk about in detail to understand what this could look like in social work curriculum. So in a human behavior course, students will be provided with a very detailed case study of an immigrant family that is navigating multiple systems and challenges while they are attempting to integrate into their new community. So when students are provided this case study, they will analyze it through a person and environment framework and the ecological systems theory. They will examine how the micro, meso, and macro factors shape the family's experience as they are trying to integrate. And so the assignment will require students to identify specific resources and barriers across each ecological system, and that could include family dynamics and community resources, all the way up to institutional policies and broader societal attitudes towards immigration. Critically, students must consider the intersectionality of the family's identity markers with their immigration status. And that could include what is their race, their class, their language, and their documentation status, and identify how those intersecting identities compound the experiences of marginalization or how they create unique strengths. This assignment reorients learning away from individual pathology and towards understanding systemic oppression, equipping students to view immigrant challenges as products of environmental context rather than personal deficits. And through this analysis, students develop a critical lens necessary to identify different intervention points across multiple systems and learn how to advocate for culturally responsive, structurally informed practice specific to that family. Second option is in a community practice course, students will work in groups and they will collaborate with a local agency in their community that works with immigrant populations. Students will research community demographics and interview at least two stakeholders. One of them would be an agency employee, and the other is an individual that is within the target population that the agency serves, which would ideally be an immigrant. And this assignment will require students to analyze power dynamics as well as identifying resources and barriers present at the community level. Students will gather the narratives from those interviews and collectively synthesize the data and develop a culturally responsive recommendation to the agency that centers immigrant voice and addresses the systemic barriers. Through this assignment, students will critically examine their own positionality, their biases, and their assumptions about immigrants in the community through the exposure and reflect upon the shifts in their perspective prior to engaging and then after the experience. And then the final one is in a policies course, students will gain an understanding of current immigrant policies. In addition, students will select a specific policy or a policy proposal and analyze how that policy impacts immigrant populations. Students will provide an initial assessment of their beliefs and assumptions and feelings about whether they believe that policy is effective and fair. Students will then engage in either a guest speaker, which could either be something like, or engage with an immigrant narrative, which could either be something like a guest speaker, a TED Talk, or a podcast to increase their understanding of the lived experience related to policy implementation. Students will utilize an ecological lens to understand the impact of the policy on individuals and an intersectionality lens to recognize how anti-immigrant sentiments marginalize and oppress the vulnerable. They will then analyze how the policy fosters either connection or disconnection between immigrants and the community and the policy itself. Then students will write a reflection on how their assumptions regarding the policy shifted and why. Do they still believe that the policy is effective and equitable? Why or why not? Through this assignment, students will demonstrate transformational learning by critically examining how policies create systemic barriers and create and center immigrant voice to understand the injustices between the policy intent and the immigrant reality. So I want to pull together all of these key findings for our conclusion. I will discuss 3 implications for education and 4 implications for practice. First, professional development will require a move away from cultural competence and instead towards utilizing cultural responsiveness as the learning outcome to prepare social workers to engage with immigrant populations. Second, a multi-theoretical framework is necessary for cultural responsiveness to provide the foundation for effectively reorienting our development to ensure that we are anti-oppressive and ecologically grounded. The final implication for education and training is that implementation of immigrant content requires a systematic curriculum redesign, which is the culturally responsive learning orientation. Additionally, there are implications for social work practice that are based upon the gap between social work education and practice with immigrant populations, because we have a lot of social workers who are in the field practicing now and say that they are not competent to work with immigrant populations. So what are the implications for those practitioners now? Primarily, social workers need enhanced cultural competency and ongoing professional development that is specifically focused to working with immigrant populations. We should be targeting and offering things like continuing education training that's focused on equipping practitioners to engage with immigrant populations. Additionally, practice with immigrant populations must be trauma informed and have contextual awareness of migration experiences as well as immigration policies. And this one is a big enough detail that I could have done my whole entire capstone on the need for culturally or for trauma informed care with immigrants. Third, practitioners must engage in continuous self reflection to increase their self awareness and understanding of their positionality. As I mentioned before, as culture is continuously developing, we must continuously be reflecting upon our own understanding and our awareness of assumptions and bias and how our privilege and positionality comes up, as each individual that we work with is a totally unique client system that we have to engage with in a unique way. And finally, and most excitingly, there are implications for cross-disciplinary practice. This framework is relevant to other helping professionals that engage with immigrant populations as well, and I believe there are prime opportunities to collaborate across disciplines and provide trainings to other professionals that work with immigrants. Professions that I would consider, which I know are represented by other people here, are healthcare, K-12 education, criminal justice, counseling, law, human resources, emergency services, or first responders. I especially thank those of you who came that fall into one of those categories, and I hope that you've been able to glean something from this because I believe that there is a need for all helping professionals and all individuals who are engaging with immigrant populations to approach this work from a culturally responsive lens, as the research shows that if we are not engaging with cultural responsiveness, or sometimes the research said cultural competence, effectively and equitably, then we could be causing even more harm than good when we are providing services. So I encourage everyone as my call to action, I encourage each of you to write down one tangible action step that you can take that you are going to do to be better equipped to engage in culturally responsive practice. And if you want to, you can put this in the chat, but I understand it may take some time for you to think about what you are going to do, as we are all, as I look at least those who I can see in the Zoom, all in professions and settings where we are engaging with immigrants or with immigrant influenced individuals. And I believe we all have a moral and ethical responsibility to engage in a culturally responsive manner. So on this slide, I have a list of a QR code where you can see a list of my references, and then my LinkedIn if you want to follow that and see what else I am doing with my professional journey, and then my email address as well if you would like to connect that way. I'll leave that up for a minute. Okay. All right, so I want to do my acknowledgement slide now that I saved emotionally for the end. The greatest thank yous of all time are not even enough to say thank you to my family who have sacrificed so much for me while I've been in this program. They've received less of my time, less of my attention, not as many opportunities to do things over the past 3 years. I especially want to thank my husband for your patience and understanding. I could not have done this without your support. Thank you also for helping me to always see others' perspectives and always be an advocate. And to our 3 sons who are thankfully at school and won't watch this, but will watch me walk across that stage next week. Eliezer, Gabriel, and Silas, may you, watching me get this degree, teach you that you can do anything that you want to do. I I dedicate my capstone research to my father-in-law, Alfonso, who was the first Dr. Pablo, and I'm not the last, but he didn't get to see me start this, but undoubtedly would be so proud if he knew. He earned his second doctorate when he was 79. I think one doctorate is enough for me. Thank you to Dr. Lamosa and Dr. Hips for being a constant support and encourager. Thank you to my classmates, especially Beth, Joy, and Olivia, who continuously affirmed the credibility of my work and kept me sane. Thank you to my co-DSWSC leaders from 2024 and 2025, who together we planned really great and fun events. Thank you to my cohort, who sometimes set the bar of expectations pretty high and who pushed me to success. Thank you to everyone at my job who affirmed me and honestly let me get by with a lighter load of work responsibilities for the last couple of years. And thank you to my Heavenly Father who sustained my family and I while I've been in school and has placed a greater calling on my life to care for immigrants. I know I have so many opportunities ahead of me, and this is honestly just the beginning, and it gets much better from here. So I'm going to take a moment to address any comments and questions that anyone may have. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see people. Ooh, the chat went wild.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jessie, for walking us through your capstone project. I'd like to now open the floor for questions regarding the presentation, the content, and we have the first question from Mallory. Go ahead, Mallory. You can unmute yourself.
No questions. I just want to say, Dr. Pablo, you did an amazing job. And thank you so much for this wonderful research.
Thank you, Mallory.
Thanks, Mallory. Do we have any questions?
Joy.
I am not going to show my face because I am in tears, but I am so proud of you. I hope your hard work pays off and I hope you feel it. You did an amazing job in this program, and I wish you so much love.
Thank you, girl.
Stephanie?
I just want to say congratulations. This was an amazing presentation. And I want to thank you too, in addition to all of the hard work in this program. You are such an amazing mentor and support to other students. And I met you my first semester coming in, and you inspired me and you supported me. And I'm so grateful. And I'm just so happy and excited for you. Congratulations.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Alfred,
Alfred?
from the beginning.
Congratulations, Dr. Pablo. It's been an absolute honor to take this journey a little bit of the ways with you. I just remember from the beginning, like some people just have it. You have it. Some of us have to kind of um, pour into it a whole lot more to get it. Well deserved. It's an honor to be here and see the end of your research to this point. And I already know that you're going to take it to another level. So congratulations and hats off to you.
Thank you so much. Alfred was my very first group project partner in this program.
Go ahead, Jalil.
Dr. Pablo, just again, incredible work. As someone who's been able to just review your work, as you were, piecing it together and to see the culmination of it. And um, also just as Dr. Lamosa said earlier, again, just, your outstanding leadership in this program. And truly, I owe a lot to you, as someone who, again, finished the program. I can't thank you enough, for just who you are as a person, and just the passion and the joy that you take in this population, and just again the amount of incredible work that you've done and achieved, and just excited to see you continue to crush it, as you go forward. And so, thank you truly for everything.
Thanks, Jalil.
Do we have any other comments or any questions for Jessie?
Hi, Jesse. It's Dr. Gould. I just want to say I'm so incredibly proud of you. You did an amazing job on your presentation. I know that you will continue to do wonderful things and share this information out. I appreciated all the application pieces. I think that that was a very direct way to talk about how to incorporate this into curriculum, and that's what educators need. And I know that you've presented at national conferences, and I know that you're getting this word out, and that's really truly making the change that needs to happen. So, congratulations. And I also wanted to say, I know that we had this conversation the other day, but just thank you so much for all that you've done with the DSWSC. That work is tremendous, and I appreciate that you continue to just be a champion for the DSW program and connection and belonging of our DSW students. So thank you so much, and big congratulations.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gould. Dr. Silva.
Well done, Dr. Pablo. I am just so excited for you. And this is just the work that you've done and the way that you present it too. I had such a fun time on this presentation with the engagement. I just, I love the product that you've put out, but more than that, I just think about all the students that you impact and the students that you've been impacting throughout your journey as a student, as a candidate, and now as a grad. Those students and from your just positionality and just who you are is just remarkable. And so awesome job, awesome work. I hope that you celebrate and keep on celebrating because this is just the start.
Thank you, friend.
All right, so we're going to wrap up today's presentation. Before I do, Jessie, I'd like to speak to you first as a person and then as a professor. As a person, I want to thank you deeply. As an immigrant woman living in the United States, I cannot thank you enough for bringing forward our needs and the needs of our communities and to give voice to a population that is not just forgotten, but largely marginalized and oppressed within the mainstream culture. So thanking you for giving voice to me and to my people. As a professor, I could not be prouder of you. Having seen your growth and your development and the amount of dedication that you have poured into your work, I'm not at least surprised knowing you, but I can also express my appreciation. You know, in this program, I have met several dozen students and have worked with several dozen students working in their DSW program. And a lot of times we have students, a lot of time we have great students, and every once in a while we have leaders like yourself. You are a leader from the beginning, and I hope that you continue to carry that torch and make our profession better because I know that you can. Thank you, Dr. Pablo. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm not
Thank
crying.
you,
You're
everyone.
crying. Everybody else is crying. I'm not crying.
We are definitely crying, definitely.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. There's so many faces or so many names in here that mean so much to me, and I appreciate everyone who took your time out to come this morning and listen to me, especially those of you who have already heard me been talking about this a lot for the past 3 years. Your support is so instrumental and a piece of this work as well. So thank you everybody for coming. For the many, congratulations. I need to save the chat to reread that later. So thank you everybody so much.
Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.